Is that working? Oh. Okay, let's start again. Good morning, First Universalist. It's a brand new day. My name is Tom Williams. I'm not Maddie Russell. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the service of First Universalist Church this morning. If you are here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. Thank you for making it to this worshiping community. Please remain for coffee hour after the service for connection and fellowship. There is a visitor's form that can be found on the back of your order of service by clicking the link in the chat. Please fill this out so that we can offer you a welcome beyond what we can offer you here this Sunday morning. If you are looking to be part of our welcoming ministry at First Universalist, please sign up to offer coffee hour. Partnering with others is encouraged. This morning we welcome Reverend Shari Halliday-Quan. Where'd it go? This morning we welcome Reverend Shari Halliday-Quan to our pulpit from the First Unitarian Church as part of our 3-congregation pulpit swap. Once a year, we get to hear from the ministers of all of our local Unitarian Universalist congregations, and we welcome you, Reverend Shari. And an invitation from Michael Scott.
There is a switch on this microphone. I thought it might be turned off. It's not. It's been a cold couple of weeks outside, but those of you who have attended this church for several years may recall that this room can get uncomfortably or even intolerably warm in July. With climate change, we expect this will get worse. At the direction of the Board of Trustees, the building or house committee has been looking into how to restore and enhance the sanctuary's original ventilation system, which has somewhat inadvertently been disabled over the years. The next step in the process will be to commission detailed engineering drawings, which can then be used to get contractor bids for the actual construction. The overall project will be quite expensive, and even the engineering drawings will cost enough that we need formal congregational approval. We'll be asking for that at a future congregational meeting. Before then, there's an opportunity today to learn more after the service. If you can spare the time, please grab your coffee and return here to the sanctuary for a brief presentation and an opportunity to ask questions. And I believe we have one more announcement from Ann Brody.
Thank you, Michael. You know, if we're going to do stuff to the sanctuary, we got to have a little money to do it with. But this is, who knows, the auction catalog. Next week is our service auction. The catalog of offerings is out, and they will be available in the Clara Barton Lounge. Brilliant. And we welcome you to come next Sunday. Please do plan to attend, stay after the service. There's a great lunch. Williams is helping to organize it. We could use a few more food items, maybe another soup, some bread, crackers, veggie tray, something like that, and some desserts. You can see Tom after the service for what to bring. Now, there are items in this catalog as low as $5. So we've got something for everybody here. And if you come to the auction and don't end up bidding on anything, you can still be entered to win some great door prizes, Wegmans gift cards, a few other things. We hope you will join us. So, auction fund, all of it is online at UURoc.org. So hope to see you there next week. Thanks. Who gets this?
Before we take a moment to turn to our neighbor, let us take a moment to turn towards the camera up there and greet our online worshiping community. If you are online, please pop into the chat to offer a greeting. To our online community, please wait to share the joys and sorrows until later in the service, so they'll be visible to those here in the sanctuary. If you are here in First Universalist now, please take a moment to turn to your neighbor and give everybody a greeting. Please rise now in body and spirit for our opening hymn, number 1008 in the Teal hymnals, When Our Heart is in a Lonely Place.
Where?
If There Is a God, words by J. David Shire. If there is a God, I think he must be shaped something like a mountain, and something like a tree, and something like an ocean. I rather imagine he looks something like a black man, and something like a white man, and something like a woman, too. I think he sees the universe through the eyes of a big brown bear, and through the eyes of a dove, and through the eyes of a gentle, medium-sized whale. I rather suspect that he happens something like a small child's smile happens, mysteriously, but as avoidable as the morning, and I think he treasures the friendships with the stars, the way other stars do. And finally, I imagine he is as much afraid of death, of nothingness, as I am, and that there are moments when he wonders if he is real. Come, let us worship together. Will Joy and Tom please come forward to light the chalice? As Tom and Joy come forward to light our chalice at First Universalist, and you light your chalices in your own homes, please join me in our chalice lighting words, spoken in unison. May we be a people of welcome, here and grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community. Please rise in body or in spirit now for our affirmation of faith, followed by the sung doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is prayer. Live together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all. Words attributed to Martin Luther. A converted heart leads to an inverted purse. Well, I think I want to be a Unitarian Universalist, but what do I have to give? Well, let me show you what other Unitarian Universalists carry in their purses. We have our eyes to see the inherent worth and dignity in all people. We have our hands to go out in the community and do the service that we profess, whether it's homelessness, migrant ministry, or whatever your passion. We have our hearts to share our awesome joys and to give each other solace in our times of sorrow. We have our time, our precious time that we give to the church in meetings, in fellowship, wherever you serve your time. We have our thoughts to seek our truth and the truth for all of mankind. And lastly, we have our finances to continue the good works of our liberal faith and our church. Words from Martin Luther: a converted heart leads to an inverted purse. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please place your offering in the offering basket and give online by scanning the QR code on the back of your order of service. For folks online, please click the link in the chat to give to the First Universalist Church. Thank you for your generosity. This morning's offering will now be given.
Good morning. It is so lovely to be with all of you. I'm Reverend Shari, as Tom introduced earlier, and I come to you from crosstown at First Unitarian, where, as my phone has been telling me for the last literally hour and a half, they too started their morning with tech problems, our screens down, and all of us having forgotten how to use hymnals. So, beginnings can be tricky. We know that this week, for sure. And, well, even when the absolute pros are working at it, sometimes you have to do it a couple of times. The Bible, in fact, has two different beginnings, two different stories of the start of the world, two totally different ways of beginning a way of being faithful together. And when Unitarian Universalists turn to Genesis, quite frankly, we typically go for the one that's got animals and the ocean. That feels, well, both cosmically powerful, but also grounded. Adam and Eve is, well, that one's a whole lot trickier for us. It's been used to harm and to hurt so many beloveds within our congregations and beyond. Whether it's same-sex couples or gender diversity, relational diversity, or simply the idea that the woman seems always to be cast as the villain, it just doesn't work for most of us. I know. I ask you to suspend that for just a moment. Let's start with the beginning, the second beginning in Genesis. We start with the ground, the earth, the humus, the soil, the same root that then becomes human. We start with a cosmic being that, for whatever reason in this part of the Bible, is plural, is God's, Elohim, not Adonai or another term used, but God's. And this earth scooped up and rolled into a ball and held to the divine lips with breath and love exhaled into it. Life. And suddenly that hummus becomes Adama. Not Adam, not a proper noun, not a name, but simply the term for human, Adama, being, a being of the earth. Now you're suspending everything you maybe have heard about the story of Adam and Eve up to this point, but you should know that I'm not making this up. These are the terms and the origin. And from this human, the gift of life, the loving of experience, the wonder of creation, but a deep loneliness. The realization that this was not meant to be experienced alone. That even a connection with the divine is not something we hold only within our own bodies. And so another being is made. This time, taken from the side of the other and named Izer, a helper or a guide, as it's sometimes translated, each valid, two humans. This is a story of Genesis 2. It's not a version that I had heard for many, many decades, and perhaps it's not a version that you have heard. And so I invite you into it. A story of becoming, of belonging, of being, that sets down so much of the harm and hurt that other versions of this story have done. A time for all ages, I hope.
Please stand now for the singing of our doxology. I invite you into this reverent time of sharing the joys and sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like to, you can place a hand over your heart to be able to listen in a heart-centered place. As Bill places stones in the bowl, I will read aloud the joys and sorrows of our gathered community. All online are also invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat. A sorrow from Dolores. For all the migrants waiting to enter, whose lives have been suddenly disrupted, for the children and parents waiting to be reunited, may they soon be fairly treated. A sorrow from Connie. The Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Budd is receiving much hate mail after asking Donald Trump to be merciful. See Connie for the address if you want to write a note of support. And I second that and say that congratulations to her for the words that she said. That was a joy. From Becky and Bill Elbow, sadness. Grieving with our son, whose fellow border agent, David Mayland, was killed this past week in Newport, Vermont, while on patrol. We felt good about the moral courage demonstrated by, and that's also by Becky and Bill. We felt good about the moral courage demonstrated by Reverend Marion Budd this past week. A joy from Kitty.
Well, it's a joy or a sorrow.
Go Bills. Okay, what's online? We got anything up there? Sarah picked up a car last week after being stolen, and it's in the repair shop. It was stolen again last night, and I can't see who that was from. From Cara, with the two little kids. I don't know her last name. Right? Cara Gagliano. Is there anything else up there? I guess that's all then. Okay. We will drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all the joys and sorrows held in the silent sanctuaries of our own hearts. May they all be held with love. We hold this morning that this church is a worshiping community that is meeting in a time of war. We acknowledge the wars and conflicts that are happening in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, the Congo, and Sudan. We acknowledge that there are more conflicts and wars happening that we are even aware of. We earnestly pray for the wars to cease. We light a white candle, acknowledging the grief we feel in this sanctuary and wherever we are worshiping from. Let us connect with that grief. And we light a yellow candle to acknowledge the joy and resilience, the tenacity found in the life that still makes life worth living. Let us be connected by joy to those living through the direct impact and loss while at war with their homes, in their homes, backyards, and countries. We will hold a brief silence in honor of many deaths that have happened this past week due to wars across the country.
Begin our prayer with a reading from Glenn Thomas Rideout. God is no noun, and certainly not an adjective. God is at least a verb, and even that shrinks her. God is not so much a woman as she resides in the improbable hope of brown mothers. God is not so much a man as he is at work in the memory of my grandfather's laugh. God is not trans. God swims in the tears of the one who sees her real self at long last in the bathroom mirror. God is not black, nor is he white. God is waiting in the contradiction of songs from slave shacks, and I have seen God in the alabaster smiles of children at play. We're getting Michelangelo all wrong. God is not the bearded one surrounded by angels floating over the Sistine. He's not Adam with his muscled back pressing the earth. No. God is the closing inch of space between the reaching fingers. Don't believe for a moment that God is Catholic. For God's sake, he isn't even human. Have you heard the wood thrush when the sun glistens? Can you see the flowers? How they speak to the bees without a word. No, God is not a spring blossom. God is not a wood thrush. God is not the sun nor the bee. God is what you see in the blossom. God is when you hear the river and suddenly discover how much it is a part of you. To be clear, God is not you. God is not you. God is somewhere in the 14 billion years which have come to mean that you are. God is, after all, at least a verb. She's neither Pharaoh's rod nor Moses' staff. She's not interested in blame. Neither does she offer praise. Truth, gratitude, those are ours to breathe. She will not have your answers. She is too large for answers. She dances too wildly to be fastened to them, and answers are nouns anyway. God is at least a verb, twirling in the radiant reds of spring blossoms, singing in the rare silences between rapid opinions, attending the tears of dark-skinned deaths, learning in tiny alabaster smiles. God is waiting in the space between fingers that might connect. He is waiting for us to stop naming her. She is waiting for us to see all of them. God is waiting to be unshrunk. So I invite you into the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life, God of many names and no name at all and one abundant love. Help us to hold the truth and the gratitude. Help us to hold the mercy and the praise that is ours to offer. Help us to know ourselves connected in a network of love that extends beyond any one of us too shrunk to be fully seen and heard and named. May all this week, grappling with fear, with violence, with addiction, with grief, or simply loneliness, be held in your abundant love. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be. The reading today named the all too infrequent silences, the all too infrequent attention we pay to the space between. And so I invite you again into a moment of stillness. May we share in a silence. We continue with Open My Heart, 1013 in the Teal hymnal. Brock and I had a brief conversation before the service began this morning about this hymn, and I said, gosh, I didn't realize that Open My Heart was in our hymnal. We've just been singing it. I had no idea. Turns out I was thinking of a totally different song. Sometimes we do it differently over at First Unitarian. And I want you to know, as we continue our tradition of the pulpit swap, and you all begin to say goodbye to Reverend Wayne May Reed, that your crosstown siblings are thinking of you, that we know you have incredible and strong leadership. We heard that Clinton gave a great rundown last week, and we're keeping you in our prayers and thoughts over the coming months and years, and we're rooting for you. Though you do things differently here sometimes. Sometimes you walk into a room and you don't know what you're going to get. That was my experience a few months ago when, in a rare break between Sundays, I found myself, not at church on Sunday, but instead at the American Folk Art Museum in Washington, D.C. There are lots of surprises and rotating exhibits here, but the person who brought me wanted me to see something in particular. We found our way through crowds and wove our way into a room just far enough from the entrance of the museum that when museum designers are showcasing their major piece, they trick you into seeing some other things on the way, even if you've just come for the one thing. We had planned to stay for a few hours, but indeed we had come to see the one thing, and I knew nothing about it. Only that this other minister wanted me to see it. We turned the corner, and I saw a space that looked almost exactly like your chancel here, raised up from the ground where everyone else was, with different levels where you could see different things. There was a pulpit, an altar table, what looked like it could have been a place to sit, an organ, and so much more. Every piece of this area was covered. There were at least 30 pieces of religious artifacts made, or at least covered, almost entirely in aluminum foil. I have, perhaps as a liability of my profession, seen a lot of religious art, from giant Buddhas in Asia to chapels in Rome made with the bones of the faithful. I have seen the ways in which people attempt to articulate visually and connect with the divine in lots of different forms. This was perhaps the most intricate and most ornate version I have ever seen. Though the foil was obviously the dominant aesthetic choice, there was, something that had sort of faded to a brown, something kind of like this, which I later read had initially been a vivid purple, but over the years had decayed, and still it was beautiful. There was gold foil, too. You've seen lots of gold in churches, I'm sure, and perhaps like you're possibly skeptical of it. But all this gold and all this silver, the gold was candy wrappers. Butterscotch and maybe Ferrero Rocher or something like that. I don't know. Intricate, lovingly, fastidiously designed, all over the course of decades by the Reverend James Hampton, someone who worked as a janitor anonymously for the most part, except for those who talked to him on their way to their offices in the General Services Administration, and who returned to his home at night to work for decades on the throne of the third heaven of the nation's millennial General Assembly. A secret room in his home, dedicated entirely to articulating what he understood to be something worthy of looking at, something worthy of experiencing, something worthy of working on. Now, like any art, there are lots of different opinions about this, and perhaps as I've described it, you've thought, Shari, you've literally just described my teenager's bedroom floor, and that is not art. And maybe you too have some secret project that you've been working on for a long time, and so you understand the dedication and commitment that this sort of work requires, especially outside of the glimpse of critics and teachers, the funding of patrons, the material that I buy from the art store, resolving to take up another craft until it sits again in my closet for 6 months untouched. Perhaps you understand something of what it means to attend to the secret chamber of your heart. But perhaps you, like me, have spent many years saying, I don't actually think much about God as an atheist or a humanist. That word doesn't work for me, and it doesn't much matter. This piece of art, the throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly, could easily be dismissed as the fanatical outpouring by someone not totally rooted in this earth or relationship. But it is generally considered to be the finest piece of visionary art in American history. It is generally considered, and I can attest to this by my own experience, impossible to describe, and yet incredible to behold. An experience worth having. And I venture to say that each of us, whether we attend to it or not, has some secret heart, some secret chamber locked away within us where we put all of the things that we think about God, where we spend time or neglect and find it to be either glistening or dusty and empty. Many of us, when we say that we don't think much about God, or that language doesn't work for us, or that we have a different cosmology or understanding of the sacred, but then we don't bother to articulate what it is, find that in moments of pressure, whether that's our own lives turned upside down by tragedy, or public discourse in which others try to force their version of God and the sacred into laws that govern our bodies and our lives, that the God that we reject is often something that most people don't believe in anyway. How many of you, by a show of hands, believe that God looks like Dick Gilbert, but in the clouds? You. And that doesn't sound so bad, honestly. But if he looks like Dick Gilbert and also dismisses or even hates the people that we love, our beloveds, not such a good God, and yet the God that so many of us reject, and the God that so many others articulate and embrace. So articulating and understanding a version of the sacred that we can work with, where the space between our fingers and the ground of all being, that which is beyond naming, is understood sometimes to get further away and sometimes to get close, becomes important. This agent of hurt and harm can too be an agent of healing and connection. By a show of hands, how many of you don't put much stock in or find meaning in stories about Jesus of Nazareth? Quite a few of you. That's not, to be clear, in raising your hand. The camera's not on you. That's very okay here. I ask you to open your ears and your heart to this poem by J. Hume. Here he is in the midst of it, right at the center of the dance floor, robes hitched up to his knees to make it easy to spin. At some point in the evening, a boy will touch the hem of his robe and beg to be healed, beg to be other anything other than this. And he will reach his arms out, sweat damp and weary from dance. He'll cup this boy's face in his hands and say, "My beautiful child, there is nothing in this heart of yours that ever needs to be healed." By your nods, a poem that perhaps you have heard in this space before. By your nods, a poem that perhaps heals that which does not need to be healed, should not need to be healed. A poem that is just a retelling of a part of the book of Mark, that is powerful and radical in its own rendering, that names both women and people with disabilities and reproduction and the ways it goes differently than we expect as holy and sacred, and that of God. Even for those of us for whom the stories of Jesus are not our home language, even for those of us who feel no need to resurrect or redeem the stories of harmful versions of God that others tell, articulating and getting to know that secret chamber in our own bodies and minds and spirits allows us to put what's glimmering and good and worthy at the center. Feminist theologians and liberation theologians have for decades been asking us to reimagine God, to challenge our notions of the vision of God in a Christian context in specific, to understand whether or not we are truly making space for the holy humanity of all. So Mary Daly, first in talking about God being a feminist, and later in Unitarian Universalist spaces, moving beyond the liberation, that is to say, the version of theology that says that God and Christianity and other versions of religion, Buddhism and Judaism and others, are on the side of the poor and the oppressed. Even after that is well established, Unitarian Universalist spaces publish works like Bill Jones, who ask us to consider the idea that God might be a white racist, that the way power moves through the universe suggests that maybe God is exactly who those of us who reject a vision of an all-powerful patriarch who makes some more powerful than others is possible. It's intentionally controversial, intentionally challenging, and even the most ardent humanists and atheists among us find ourselves wanting to say, no, even the God I don't believe in cannot be that. There is a love that connects us all, a pulse of humanity, a pause between us and that which is most sacred and possible. That the headlines of this week, the cycle of outrage and the exhaustion of empire, is not the end of the story. And that our yearning to help, our yearning to be helped, our yearning to know that that cannot be the end, is a version of holiness that means that God surely cannot be all that those in power here in this kingdom, which it looks more and more like every day, can be. So I'm the third of 4 sermons you've heard on gender this month. And I imagine some of you are a little bit sick of it. You might have been sick of it to begin with. Why talk about gender in a time like this? Why talk about the ways in which we can imagine ourselves as holy and sacred and beloved in such a time as this? Don't we all need each other? Don't we need to move to action? Don't we need to fight? And the answer, of course, to all of those is yes, and yes, and yes. And also, don't we need to love? Don't we need to understand that when we are tired and weary and exhausted, there is a secret chamber inside of all of our hearts, and whether we call it God's or God's, or Allah, or Elohim, or Allah is most merciful, or the tree in my backyard, or the ground of all being, or the sunset, or the smile in my grandchildren's eyes when they are delighted, or the warmth of my husband's hand as he slips away for the final time. Whatever it is that we call it, we will need to hold on to articulate, to understand. God is trans is the beginning of a sentence that we would hear in our most conservative churches. God is transcendent, wholly other. God is, well, sure, immanent, everywhere, but mostly totally unlike us, humble and unworthy as we are. We know our Unitarian Universalist theology and tradition teaches us that we as humans are worthy, and quite frankly, we maybe sometimes struggle with being humble, but we can be that too. Our Unitarian Universalist theology and tradition teaches us that each of us has a bit of the sacred within us. And yet we often fail from our pulpits and religious education and in our conversations to articulate the opposing, and by opposing, I simply mean the other side of the circle, part of that, which is we have to be able to imagine each of us as part of God. No, you are not God. No, I am not God. No, Dick Gilbert is not God. But each of us holds a piece of the truth. And our ability to understand God as not only transcendent, but also transgender is deeply important. If from not our pulpits, but our country's largest stages, we've heard over the last week that trans and non-binary people do not exist, even though, like, the person in front of you is a testament to that simply being untrue, that your beloveds and your existence knows that to be a falsehood. We have to imagine space for ourselves and each other in that secret chamber locked away in our own spaces and hearts. Our naming, our praising, our celebrating of that which we hold most sacred is something that will require deep practice from us. Last week, on Martin Luther King Day, a day where we took a break from our pulpit swap for just a bit to celebrate what we all consider a high holiday with our own congregations, I told my congregation about my own struggle with the concept of beloved community. As a technical theological term, capital B, beloved, capital C, community, describes a place where people of all genders, across class, across religion, across national origin, across many ways of difference, can come together and work toward common good and see and be seen fully in all of our beauty and glory. That concept that does not erode difference but makes way for it and is held up by a love that extends beyond any of us describes a kingdom, a way of making kin that we have not yet arrived at, that our congregations and our friends are not yet actually enacting all of the time. And yet, do we not get glimpses of it? Does the capital B, beloved, capital C, community not find, like God or the sacred or the promise of a Bills Super Bowl win, occasionally show its face, sometimes then to be obscured and held still by the most faithful among us? Don't we get glimpses of this? Aren't our congregations and ways of being places where the kingdom, the ways of being together and the ways where each and every one of us, where our non-binary and trans beloveds are understood to be essential as part of the nature of God, a thing we get to glimpse on occasion when our hearts are in holy places and we make way for one another. So I ask you now, in a place I know is pluralistic in our theology, where some of you are Jesus lovers and some of you are Buddhist practitioners, and all of you are either Unitarian Universalists or find yourself in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, to practice something with me, to take on words that feel perhaps different for you, but maybe make space for a broader picture of God's that does not allow us to shrink the most sacred. So I'm going to invite you to pick one of 3 things to say out loud. We're going to all say it out loud at the same time, practicing a way of praise that is not our normal way of being. And as Unitarian Universalists, I imagine some of you will choose to say something entirely different than my 3 options. So it goes. Here are the options. I'll say each of them together, and then you can pick. And we'll say them all together at the same time. He is beautiful. Let us praise her. We worship them. He is beautiful. Let us praise her. We worship them. Has everyone selected one? Yes. Some of you are struggling. You're like, Shari, each of those was terrible. You will find your way. I trust you. All right. Join in. I'm going to say them all. Join in as you're comfortable. Let us praise her. We worship them. He is beautiful. He is beautiful. It is beautiful. Each of these articulations of love and the sacred allow us to try on a way of being close to God, being close to the pulse, the space between heartbeats, the gap between fingertips. Each of these phrases that work or don't work for each of you allows us to articulate a sense of the sacred that gives us a glimpse of something beautiful, that reminds us what we are fighting for, that helps us to stay focused when the rage and outrage become too much of a distraction, that allow us to hold tight to the tether of love that is God, that is connection, that is present in each and all of us and in the sacred rooms of your heart. May it be so, and amen. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. And together we'll sing hymn 23 in our gray hymnals, Bring Many Names. Go out into this world. Go from the secret chambers of your heart and that which you hold most sacred out into this world, carrying love. Go carrying exactly who you are, a piece of the particular, knowing that you are not God, and yet the sacred lies and relies within you and within every living being. I love you. Go in peace.
When I was a girl each week, on Sunday we would go to church, pay attention to the priest, and he would read the holy word, and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. When I was in Sunday school, we will learn about the time when Moses split the sea in two, Jesus made the water wine. I remember feeling sad, miracles don't happen still, and now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that everything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. Read a questioning child's face and say it's not a testament. That'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come and say it's not a sacrament. I tell you that it can't be done. This morning I stood outside, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush, singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, having second-rate hand-me-down. Now I'm walking with a reverent head, 'cause everything is holy now. 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 Sing with me. Everything is holy now. Everything is holy